Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something stranger than medieval medicine and more controversial than a peasant stealing the Lord's rabbit. Ibogaine, the illegal psychedelic drug that supposedly cures heroin addiction in a single night. Not gradually, not with therapy and support groups. One night, one trip, one chance at freedom or one chance at cardiac arrest, depending on how you look at it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. A huge thank you to the viewer who suggested this topic. Your curiosity shapes this channel, and I'm grateful you're here. We're now live on Spotify too, so check the link in the description if you'd like to listen there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Have you ever wondered what it's like to hallucinate for 36 hours straight while your brain rewrites itself? What kind of person decides to risk everything on an unregulated substance banned in most countries? How does a plant root from Central Africa end up as the last hope for people trapped in addiction? Could you survive a night where your heart rate drops, your body temperature plummets, and you're forced to confront every demon you've ever tried to forget? Would you trust a drug that's illegal, unstudied, and administered in underground clinics by people who may or may not have medical degrees? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up as someone desperate enough to try Ibogaine. The year is 2024. You have no other options, a plane ticket to Mexico, and a hope that borders on madness. Good luck. Let's start with the basics, because Ibogaine isn't your typical drug story. It doesn't come from a lab in Switzerland or a pharmaceutical company boardroom. It comes from the root bark of a shrubby little plant called Tabernanthe iboga, native to the rainforests of Central Africa, specifically Gabon. For centuries, the Bwiti people used iboga in spiritual ceremonies, not to get high for fun, but to commune with ancestors, undergo initiation rites, and gain profound spiritual insight. Think of it as their version of a vision quest, only instead of fasting in the desert, you're chewing bark that tastes like bitter dirt and makes you see the universe fold in on itself. The plant itself looks completely unassuming. If you walked past it in the jungle, you wouldn't give it a second glance. Small leaves, yellowish flowers, nothing that screams, I contain a molecule that can rewire human consciousness. But buried in its roots is Ibogaine, an alkaloid so chemically complex that scientists are still trying to figure out exactly what it does and why. It's not an opioid, though it affects opioid receptors. It's not a classic psychedelic like LSD or psilocybin, though it causes intense hallucinations. It exists in its own category, a pharmacological orphan that shouldn't work but somehow does. In traditional Bwiti ceremonies, participants don't just nibble a little bark and call it a day. They consume massive amounts over the course of hours, often accompanied by drumming, chanting, and ritual dancing. The experience isn't recreational, it's transformative. Young men undergo initiation ceremonies where they take iboga to symbolically die and be reborn as adults. Elders use it to communicate with ancestors and gain wisdom. The entire culture revolves around this plant as a sacred technology for accessing hidden dimensions of reality. When Western anthropologists first encountered iboga ceremonies in the early 20th century, they were equal parts fascinated and horrified. Here were people voluntarily ingesting a substance that made them vomit, convulse, and hallucinate for days, all in the name of spiritual growth. It seemed primitive, dangerous, irrational. But what those anthropologists missed was the profound psychological utility embedded in the practice. The Bwiti weren't getting high. They were conducting therapy, surgery on the soul using a plant as their scalpel. Fast forward to modern times, and Ibogaine has been extracted, isolated, and studied in labs around the world. Scientists have mapped its molecular structure, identified its metabolites, and documented its effects on neurotransmitter systems. What they've found is both elegant and baffling. Ibogaine appears to reset the brain's reward circuitry, the same pathways hijacked by drugs like heroin, cocaine, and alcohol. It's like hitting a factory reset button on a smartphone that's been corrupted by malware, except the smartphone is your brain, and the malware is addiction. But here's where it gets weird. Nobody fully understands how it works. There are theories, hypotheses, educated guesses, but the mechanism of action remains partially mysterious, which drives researchers crazy and makes regulatory agencies nervous. How do you approve a drug when you can't explain exactly why it does what it does? So Ibogaine remains in limbo, simultaneously one of the most promising addiction treatments ever discovered and one of the most legally and scientifically controversial. It's a plant that shouldn't work, but it does, and that makes all the difference. Ibogaine's journey from African ritual to addiction treatment was pure accident. In 1962, a 19-year-old heroin addict named Howard Lotsof was living in New York, desperately looking for his next high. He'd heard about this obscure psychedelic from Africa and figured, why not? He and a group of friends took Ibogaine expecting a fun trip. Instead, something bizarre happened. After 30 hours of intense hallucinations, Lotsof emerged and his cravings were gone. Completely gone. No withdrawal, no shaking, no desperate need to score. It was as if his addiction had been surgically removed from his brain. He was so stunned that he spent the rest of his life trying to convince the world that Ibogaine could save lives, even though the world mostly responded by making it illegal and calling him crazy. Lotsof wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a doctor. He was a junkie who stumbled onto something extraordinary and had the presence of mind to recognize it. Think about how rare that is. Most drug addicts aren't conducting experiments. They're just trying to make it through the day without getting sick. But Lotsof was different. He was curious, observant, and stubborn enough to believe that what happened to him wasn't a fluke. He gave Ibogaine to 6 of his friends, all heroin addicts, and 5 of them reported the same miraculous effect. Their addiction simply vanished after 1 dose. This wasn't supposed to happen. Addiction doesn't work like that. You don't just wake up one day and decide you're done. The brain chemistry doesn't reset overnight. Withdrawal takes weeks, sometimes months, and the psychological cravings can last years. But Ibogaine seemed to short-circuit the entire process. Lotsof couldn't explain it, but he knew he'd witnessed something revolutionary. So he did what any passionate, slightly unhinged person would do. He spent the next 4 decades trying to get Ibogaine recognized as a legitimate addiction treatment. He founded organizations, lobbied politicians, funded research, and personally helped hundreds of addicts access Ibogaine when no one else would. He wasn't motivated by profit. There was no money in Ibogaine, especially after it got banned. He was motivated by the simple, stubborn belief that people deserved access to something that could save their lives. The medical establishment predictably was skeptical. A heroin addict claiming he found a miracle cure using an African hallucinogen. It sounded like a joke. The FDA politely declined to investigate. Universities wouldn't touch it. Pharmaceutical companies had zero interest in a drug you only take once. After all, where's the profit in curing someone when you can keep them on maintenance medication forever? But Lotsof didn't give up. He connected with researchers in Europe and Latin America who were willing to study Ibogaine seriously. Slowly, painstakingly, the data started coming in. People were getting clean. Not all of them, but enough to suggest something real was happening. By the time Lotsof died in 2010, Ibogaine had gone from a fringe curiosity to a legitimate, if still controversial, treatment used by thousands of people worldwide. The tragedy is that Lotsof never lived to see Ibogaine legalized or mainstream. He died knowing he had helped countless individuals but failed to change the system. His discovery, made accidentally in a New York apartment in 1962, remains underground, available only to those desperate or brave enough to seek it out. It's a reminder that sometimes the most important medical breakthroughs don't come from billion-dollar labs. Sometimes they come from a 19-year-old junkie who swallowed some bark and paid attention to what happened next. Here's where things get weird, and by weird, I mean scientifically baffling. Ibogaine doesn't work like methadone or Suboxone, which just replace one opioid with another, slightly less destructive opioid. Instead, Ibogaine seems to hit reset on multiple neurotransmitter systems at once. It floods your brain with serotonin, dopamine, and other chemicals, while simultaneously binding to opioid receptors and essentially telling your brain, hey, remember what normal felt like? Let's go back there. It also increases levels of something called GDNF, glial cell line-derived neurotrophic factor, which helps repair damaged neurons. In other words, it doesn't just mask withdrawal, it appears to actually heal the brain's reward circuitry. Scientists are still scratching their heads about how one drug can do all that, especially since it's structurally related to absolutely nothing else. Let's break this down because your brain on addiction is a mess. Years of drug use have essentially hijacked your reward system. Every time you used heroin or meth or alcohol, you flooded your brain with dopamine, the feel-good chemical that's supposed to reward you for eating, having sex, or accomplishing something meaningful. But drugs deliver dopamine in massive, unnatural amounts. Over time, your brain adapts by producing less dopamine naturally and reducing the number of dopamine receptors. This is why addicts need more and more of the drug just to feel normal. It's not weakness, it's neurobiology. Traditional addiction treatments try to gradually wean you off drugs, giving your brain time to recalibrate. The problem is that this process is agonizing and takes months or years, during which relapse is almost inevitable. Ibogaine takes a different approach. It appears to force the recalibration all at once, in a single 36-hour session. Here's what seems to happen, based on the limited research available. Ibogaine is metabolized in your liver into noribogaine, a compound that sticks around in your system for weeks. Both ibogaine and noribogaine interact with an absurd number of receptor sites in your brain: serotonin receptors, dopamine receptors, opioid receptors, NMDA receptors, nicotinic receptors, and probably a few others scientists haven't identified yet. It's like Ibogaine shows up to the party and talks to everyone at once, rearranging the entire social dynamic. One of the most important effects is on something called the kappa opioid receptor, which is involved in the dysphoria and negative emotional states associated with withdrawal. Ibogaine seems to modulate this receptor in a way that eliminates withdrawal symptoms almost immediately. Meanwhile, the surge of GDNF, that neurotrophic factor mentioned earlier, acts like fertilizer for your neurons, encouraging them to grow new connections and repair damage caused by years of drug abuse. But wait, there's more. Ibogaine also affects the part of your brain that consolidates memories and processes emotions. This might explain why people have such vivid, emotionally charged visions during the trip. It's as if Ibogaine is forcing your brain to reprocess traumatic memories and emotional pain, integrating them in a way that reduces their power over you. It's psychotherapy and neurosurgery rolled into one hallucinogenic package. The problem, and it's a big problem, is that we don't fully understand any of this. Most of the research on Ibogaine has been underfunded, small scale, and conducted outside the United States. We know it works for many people, but we don't know exactly why, and we can't predict who it will work for. It's like having a key that opens a lock you don't understand. You're grateful it works, but you're also terrified of what might happen if you turn it the wrong way. And that's where we are with Ibogaine, standing at the door, key in hand, hoping we don't accidentally break something irreparable. So what's it actually like to take Ibogaine? Buckle up, because this isn't a recreational experience. You're not giggling at walls or seeing pretty colours. You're flat on your back for anywhere from 24 to 36 hours, often in a darkened room, while your consciousness takes a guided tour through every mistake, trauma, and repressed memory you've ever had. Some people describe it as watching their entire life play out like a movie. Others say it's like being disassembled and reassembled by alien surgeons. Your body, temperature drops. Your heart rate slows. You can't move. You can barely speak. You're trapped inside your own head, and all you can do is watch, feel, and occasionally vomit into a bucket someone thoughtfully placed next to you. The experience typically unfolds in phases, like acts in a very long, very strange play. The first phase is what researchers call the visionary phase, and it's exactly as intense as it sounds. With your eyes closed, you're suddenly watching a panoramic display of your entire life. Not random fragments or blurry memories, but crystal clear scenes playing out in chronological order. You see yourself as a child, maybe sitting at a dinner table where something hurtful was said. You see the exact moment you first tried drugs, the face of the person who handed them to you, the way the room smelled, the feeling of crossing a line you couldn't uncross. But here's the thing, you're not just watching these memories like a passive viewer scrolling through old photos, you're experiencing them from multiple perspectives simultaneously. You see yourself making terrible decisions, and you also see why you made them. You feel the pain you caused others, and you understand the pain that caused you to cause that pain. It's empathy and accountability colliding at high speed, and there's nowhere to hide from it. The second phase is what some people call the evaluation phase, where your subconscious essentially holds an intervention with itself. You're forced to examine patterns, connections, and truths you've spent years avoiding. Why did you really start using? What were you running from? Who did you hurt, and why did you hurt them? The answers come not as intellectual insights, but as full-body emotional downloads. You don't think, oh, I was traumatized as a child. You feel the trauma, process it, and somehow, inexplicably, release it. Throughout all of this, your physical body is going through its own ordeal. You're sweating even though you're freezing. Your muscles twitch and spasm. You might vomit multiple times, though by the third or fourth time, you've accepted that vomiting is just part of the furniture now. Your heart rate drops to levels that would normally send you to the emergency room, but the clinic staff monitoring you know this is normal. Well, normal for Ibogaine, which is a pretty low bar for normal. Some people report encountering entities during the trip, beings made of light, ancestors, spirit guides, or just presences that feel intelligent and benevolent. Skeptics dismiss this as drug-induced hallucination, but the people who experience it insist it feels more real than reality. They have conversations with these entities. They receive advice, forgiveness, or warnings. Whether these encounters are neurological misfires or genuine spiritual experiences is a question science can't answer yet, and maybe never will. By the 24-hour mark, the intense visions start to fade, replaced by what's called the residual stimulation phase. You're still awake. Sleep is basically impossible on Ibogaine, but the cinematic quality of the experience has ended. Now you're left with your thoughts, which are unusually clear and unfiltered. This is when a lot of people process what they just witnessed, making connections and commitments about how they'll live differently. Finally, after 30 to 36 hours, you start to come down. The drug is still in your system, Ibogaine. Ibogaine's metabolite will linger for weeks, but the acute effects are wearing off. You're exhausted, emotionally raw, and possibly a little unsure if what just happened was real or some elaborate fever dream. But one thing is undeniable. You're different. The person who swallowed that dose 36 hours ago isn't the same person lying in this bed now. Whether that difference lasts is another question entirely. But for now, in this moment, you're free, and that feeling is worth every hellish second you just endured. When it comes to Ibogaine, there's no such thing as a light experience. The therapeutic dose, what addiction specialists call a flood dose, is massive. We're talking anywhere from 15 to 25 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, which for an average person means swallowing anywhere from 1 to 2 grams of a substance that tastes like Satan's mulch. There's no easing into it, no microdosing your way to enlightenment. You take the flood dose, or you don't bother, because anything less won't break. The addiction. It's all or nothing, and that terrifies most people, rightfully so. You're essentially chemical sledgehammering your brain and hoping it reassembles correctly. The term flood dose is both medically descriptive and philosophically accurate. You're flooding your system with Ibogaine, overwhelming your neurotransmitter receptors and forcing a reset that happens whether you're ready or not. Compare this to other addiction treatments, which involve gradually tapering doses, carefully managed withdrawal, and months of slow progress. Ibogaine says, "Nah, we're doing this now all at once, buckle up." Calculating the correct flood dose is part science, part educated guess, and part prayer. Clinics weigh you, review your medical history, and consider factors like how long you've been using, what drug you're addicted to, and your overall health. Someone coming off a decade-long heroin addiction needs a different dose than someone quitting alcohol. Too little Ibogaine, and you endure 30 hours of hallucinations without breaking the addiction. Too much, and you risk cardiac complications or psychological breakdown. Most clinics start with a test dose, a small amount, maybe 50 to 100 milligrams, given a few hours before the flood dose. This serves two purposes. It screens for any adverse cardiac reactions, and it gives your body a chance to acclimate to the drug. If your heart tolerates the test dose without arrhythmias, they proceed with the full flood. If not, the treatment ends before it begins, and you've just flown to Mexico and paid thousands of dollars for nothing. The flood dose itself usually comes in capsule form, though some clinics offer it as a tea brewed from iboga root bark. The capsules are easier, you just swallow them with water and wait. The tea is more traditional, but tastes absolutely vile, like drinking liquid dirt mixed with battery acid and regret. Either way, once it's in your system, there's no backing out. You can't vomit it up fast enough. You can't change your mind. The next 36 hours are locked in, and all you can do is surrender. There's something almost ritualistic about taking the flood dose. You're making a conscious decision to temporarily destroy your current state of consciousness, in hopes of rebuilding something better. It's terrifying, but it's also empowering. For once, you're not passively letting addiction control you. You're actively choosing to confront it, to rip it out by the roots, even if that means enduring the worst experience of your life. Some people describe the moment they swallow the flood dose as weirdly peaceful. After years of chaos, broken promises, and failed attempts to get clean, there's a strange relief in finally taking decisive action. You've done everything you can do. You've travelled here, paid your money, signed the waivers, and swallowed the medicine. Now it's out of your hands. The Ibogaine will do what it does, and you'll either come out the other side clean or you won't. The uncertainty is agonizing, but at least it's honest. The flood dose also represents a philosophical commitment. You're acknowledging that half measures don't work. You can't dabble with sobriety or flirt with recovery. You have to go all in, risk everything, and trust that on the other side of this chemical crucible is a version of yourself worth salvaging. It's the opposite of modern medicine's cautious incrementalism. It's bold, dangerous, and occasionally miraculous. And for people who've tried everything else and failed, bold and dangerous start to sound like pretty good odds. Let's be very clear about something. Ibogaine is dangerous. Not might give you a bad trip dangerous. Not uncomfortable side effects dangerous. We're talking your heart could stop dangerous. Ibogaine has a nasty habit of prolonging the QT interval on your heart's electrical cycle, which in plain English means it can cause fatal arrhythmias. People have died. Not many, but enough that every reputable clinic makes you sign about 17 different waivers, acknowledging that you understand you might not wake up. If you have any pre-existing heart condition, hell, even if you don't know you have one, Ibogaine can turn lethal in minutes. The QT interval is a measurement on an electrocardiogram that represents the time it takes for your heart's ventricles to contract and relax. Ibogaine prolongs this interval, sometimes significantly. When the QT interval gets too long, the heart's electrical system can misfire, triggering something called torsades de puntes, a type of irregular heartbeat that can quickly spiral into cardiac arrest. It's not a gentle decline. One moment your heart is beating, the next it's not. And in an underground clinic without advanced medical equipment, by the time anyone realizes something's wrong, it might be too late. The deaths, though rare, are well documented. A person checks into a clinic, takes Ibogaine, and never wakes up. Sometimes it's someone with an undiagnosed heart defect. Sometimes it's someone who lied about their medical history or didn't disclose medications they were taking. Sometimes it's pure bad luck, a genetic predisposition nobody could have predicted. The exact number of Ibogaine-related deaths is unknown because many occur in countries with poor record keeping, and families often don't report them out of shame or fear of legal consequences. What makes this especially heartbreaking is that the people dying are often the ones most desperate for help. They've exhausted every other option. Rehab failed. Methadone failed. 12-step programs failed. They're out of ideas and out of hope, so they travel to a foreign country and place their lives in the hands of strangers because what else is there? And for most people, it works. But for a small percentage, it becomes a death sentence instead of a second chance. Beyond cardiac issues, Ibogaine poses other risks. It can interact dangerously with certain medications, especially SSRIs, benzodiazepines, and other psychiatric drugs. Combining Ibogaine with these substances can cause serotonin syndrome, seizures, or respiratory depression. That's why reputable clinics require patients to taper off these medications weeks before treatment, a process that's excruciating for someone already struggling with mental health issues. There's also the risk of psychological damage. A bad Ibogaine trip doesn't just mean a few unpleasant hours, it can mean encountering trauma so overwhelming that you emerge more broken than when you started. Some people develop PTSD from their Ibogaine experience. Others have psychotic breaks or prolonged dissociative episodes. The line between therapeutic catharsis and psychological destruction is disturbingly thin, and there's no reliable way to predict which side of that line you'll land on. Then there's the problem of unregulated clinics. Not everyone administering Ibogaine knows what they're doing. Some providers have minimal medical training. They don't have proper screening protocols, don't monitor cardiac function, and might not even have emergency equipment on hand. They're essentially winging it, and when things go wrong, they're in over their heads. People have died not because Ibogaine itself killed them, but because the clinic didn't know how to handle complications. The dark side of Ibogaine isn't hypothetical. It's real, documented, and impossible to ignore. But here's the brutal calculus. Addiction also kills. Opioid overdoses alone kill over 100,000 Americans every year. Alcohol-related deaths add another 100,000. So when someone weighs the risk of Ibogaine against the certainty of dying from addiction, the math starts to look different. It's not that Ibogaine is safe, it's that nothing about addiction is safe. You're choosing between dangerous options, and sometimes the dangerous option with a chance of freedom feels like the only option worth taking. Here's where the story gets frustrating. Ibogaine is classified as a Schedule I substance in the United States, meaning the government has decided it has no accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. Never mind that thousands of people have used it to successfully kick heroin, meth, and alcohol. Never mind that it's not addictive. In fact, most people describe the experience as so intense they never want to do it again. The real reason it's illegal? Money, politics, and the fact that addiction is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Methadone clinics, rehab centers, pharmaceutical companies, they all profit from addiction being a chronic, lifelong condition. A one-time cure threatens that entire ecosystem. Let's follow the money, because that's where the truth usually hides. The addiction treatment industry in the United States is worth somewhere north of $40 billion annually. Methadone clinics charge patients daily to receive their dose. Suboxone, another maintenance medication, generates billions in revenue for pharmaceutical companies. Rehab facilities charge tens of thousands of dollars for 28-day programs that have notoriously low success rates. The entire system is built on the premise that addiction is a chronic disease requiring lifelong management, which conveniently translates to lifelong revenue. Now imagine if Ibogaine became widely available and legal. Imagine if addicts could take a single treatment, pay a one-time fee, and walk away clean. The financial implications would be catastrophic for an industry that depends on relapse and recidivism. Methadone clinics would lose patients. Pharmaceutical companies would lose customers. Rehab centers would lose their revolving door of repeat clients. Nobody with a financial stake in addiction treatment has any incentive to support Ibogaine. But it's not just about money. There's also politics. The war on drugs, which has been an abject failure by almost every measurable standard, is built on the idea that certain substances are inherently evil and must be eradicated. Admitting that a Schedule I drug could cure addiction would undermine decades of policy and propaganda. It would raise uncomfortable questions like, if we were wrong about Ibogaine, what else were we wrong about? Politicians and bureaucrats don't like admitting mistakes, especially mistakes that destroyed millions of lives and cost trillions of dollars. The FDA's official stance is that Ibogaine hasn't been proven safe or effective through rigorous clinical trials, and they're technically correct. There haven't been large-scale, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. But here's the catch-22. It's almost impossible to conduct those studies when the substance is Schedule I. Researchers can't get funding. Universities won't touch it. The regulatory barriers are insurmountable. So Ibogaine remains illegal because it hasn't been studied, and it can't be studied because it's illegal. Meanwhile, other countries have taken a more pragmatic approach. New Zealand allows Ibogaine treatment under certain conditions. Mexico and Costa Rica operate in legal grey zones where clinics can function without harassment. Some European countries are beginning to explore Ibogaine as a research tool, but the United States, despite having the worst opioid epidemic in its history, remains stubbornly opposed. There's also a cultural dimension to the prohibition. Ibogaine comes from Africa. It's tied to indigenous spiritual practices. It's associated with counterculture, psychedelics, and people like Howard Lotsof, a former heroin addict with no medical degree who championed a plant-based cure. In the eyes of mainstream medicine and regulatory agencies, that's 3 strikes: foreign, spiritual, and championed by outsiders. It doesn't matter that it works. It doesn't fit the paradigm of how medicine is supposed to work, so it gets dismissed. The cruelty of Ibogaine's legal status becomes clear when you consider the human cost. Every day that Ibogaine remains illegal, people die from overdoses that might have been prevented. Every year that passes without proper research is another year of lost knowledge, lost lives, and lost opportunities. The government isn't protecting people by keeping Ibogaine illegal. It's abandoning them to a system that profits from their suffering and calls it compassion. Since Ibogaine is illegal in most countries, a shadow industry has sprung up. Clinics, some legitimate, some sketchy as hell, operate in places like Mexico, Costa Rica and New Zealand, where Ibogaine occupies a legal grey zone. These aren't hospitals. They're often beach houses, converted hotels, or rural retreats where a provider, who may or may not have any medical training, administers Ibogaine to people who've flown in from around the world. Some clinics have doctors, EKG machines, and emergency protocols. Others have a guy named Carlos, a bucket, and a prayer. Choosing the wrong clinic can mean the difference between recovery and a body bag, but when you're desperate enough, you roll the dice. The underground Ibogaine scene is a study in contrasts. On one end of the spectrum, you have professionally run operations staffed by doctors, nurses, and addiction specialists. These clinics look and feel like small medical facilities. They have full cardiac monitoring equipment, oxygen, emergency medications, and established protocols for every possible complication. Patients receive thorough medical evaluations, psychological counselling, and aftercare planning. These places charge premium prices, often $10,000 to $15,000, but they're as safe as Ibogaine treatment can possibly be. On the other end, you have operations that are less rigorous. A clinic might be someone's house with a spare bedroom. The medical staff might be a former addict who took Ibogaine once and figured that qualified them to administer it to others. There's no cardiac monitoring, no emergency equipment, and no real plan for what happens if something goes wrong. These places charge less, sometimes as little as $3,000 or $4,000, which makes them accessible to desperate people who can't afford the legitimate clinics. But the risks are proportionally higher. The problem is that from the outside, it's hard to tell which is which. Websites all look professional. Testimonials all sound glowing. Everyone claims to be experienced, compassionate, and committed to safety. So people rely on word of mouth, online forums, and gut instinct to choose a clinic, knowing that a wrong choice could literally kill them. Some clinics have developed reputations over years of operation. The really good ones have waiting lists months long. The bad ones tend to shut down after someone dies, only to reopen under a new name in a different location. There's no regulatory oversight, no licensing board, no way to hold anyone accountable. If something goes wrong, you can't sue. If someone dies, there's rarely an investigation. It's the Wild West of medicine, operating in the shadows because the law offers no legal path forward. Geographically, Mexico has become the epicenter of underground Ibogaine treatment, particularly cities like Tijuana, Rosarito, and Puerto Vallarta. The proximity to the United States makes it convenient for American addicts, and Mexican authorities generally leave the clinics alone as long as they're not causing obvious problems. Costa Rica is another popular destination, marketed as safer and more regulated, though the actual level of regulation is debatable. New Zealand allows Ibogaine treatment but requires extensive oversight, making it more expensive and harder to access. What's particularly striking is the clientele. These underground clinics serve everyone from Wall Street executives to homeless addicts who scrape together just enough money for treatment. Rich and poor, young and old, all united by desperation and hope. The wealthy might fly first class and stay in private rooms. The poor might hitchhike to the border and sleep on a couch. But once the Ibogaine kicks in, everyone's the same. Just another human being fighting for their life. The providers themselves are a mixed bag. Some are true believers, people who've dedicated their lives to helping addicts access a treatment they believe in. They work long hours, charge reasonable fees, and genuinely care about their patients. Others are opportunists who see desperate people as easy money. They cut corners, lie about their qualifications, and disappear when things go wrong. And then there's everyone in between, well-intentioned but underqualified, competent but greedy, passionate but reckless. Living in this grey zone takes a toll on everyone involved. Clinic operators live in constant fear of legal trouble, even in countries where Ibogaine isn't explicitly banned. Patients carry the burden of knowing they're taking a huge risk with limited recourse if something goes wrong. And everyone involved is acutely aware that what they're doing, trying to heal addiction with a banned substance, should be legal, should be studied, should be supported by governments and medical institutions. Instead, it's happening in beach houses and hotel rooms, hidden from the world that claims to care about addiction, but refuses to embrace solutions that actually work. Reputable Ibogaine clinics don't just take your money and hand you a cup of bark tea. They screen you extensively. Blood tests, EKGs, psychological evaluations, medical history deep dives. They're looking for anything that could kill you. Heart problems, liver disease, psychiatric disorders, certain medications that interact badly with Ibogaine. If you're on SSRIs, benzodiazepines, or certain other drugs, you have to taper off weeks in advance, which for an addict is its own special kind of torture. The screening process can take days or even weeks, and some people get turned away entirely. It's not about being exclusionary. It's about not wanting to explain to your family why you died in a beach house in Tijuana. The screening process begins long before you arrive at the clinic. Most facilities require you to fill out extensive questionnaires about your medical history, substance use, mental health, and current medications. They want to know everything. Have you ever had a seizure? Any heart palpitations? Family history of sudden cardiac death? History of psychosis? Have you ever tried to kill yourself? The questions are invasive and uncomfortable, but they're necessary. Ibogaine interacts with so many systems in your body that a single undisclosed condition could be fatal. If your initial paperwork looks acceptable, the clinic usually requests medical records and lab work from your doctor back home. They want recent EKGs, liver function tests, kidney function tests, complete blood counts. They're especially concerned about your heart, any abnormality in the EKG, any history of arrhythmias, and you might be disqualified before you even board a plane. Some clinics are more cautious than others. The really careful ones turn away about 20 to 30% of applicants. The less careful ones accept almost anyone who can pay, which should tell you something about their priorities. Once you arrive at the clinic, the screening intensifies. You'll undergo another EKG, possibly multiple EKGs, to establish a baseline and look for any changes. Your blood pressure, heart rate, and oxygen saturation are checked repeatedly. A doctor or nurse will review your medication list in excruciating detail, asking about dosages, how long you've been taking each medication, and when you took your last dose. This is where people sometimes get caught lying. They'll claim they stopped taking benzodiazepines 2 weeks ago when they actually took one this morning. Big mistake. The combination of benzos and Ibogaine can be deadly. The psychological evaluation is equally important. Ibogaine can trigger psychotic episodes in people with certain mental health conditions. If you have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder with psychotic features, or a history of severe dissociation, many clinics will refuse to treat you. The risk of a permanent break from reality is too high. Even conditions like severe depression or PTSD require careful consideration. The clinic needs to weigh whether the psychological trauma of the Ibogaine experience will help you or break you. Then there's the interview process. The provider will sit down with you and ask blunt questions. Why do you want to do this? What happens if it doesn't work? Do you have support back home? Are you being pressured into this by family? What's your plan for staying clean afterward? They're assessing not just your medical suitability, but your emotional readiness. Some people show up thinking Ibogaine is a magic bullet that will fix their life without any effort on their part. Those people often get a reality check during the screening. Ibogaine is a tool, not a miracle. If you're not willing to do the work afterward, you're wasting everyone's time. Medication tapering is one of the most challenging parts of the screening process. If you're on SSRIs, you need to taper off slowly over several weeks to avoid withdrawal and serotonin syndrome, when combined with Ibogaine. If you're on benzodiazepines, the taper is even more critical because benzo withdrawal can cause seizures and death. For someone who's been using these medications to manage anxiety or depression, stopping them feels like removing a life preserver in the middle of the ocean. You're already struggling, and now you have to struggle more just to qualify for treatment. Some clinics provide medical supervision during the tapering process, prescribing alternative medications or offering supportive care. Others just give you a schedule and wish you luck. The unspoken reality is that many people cheat during the taper. They can't handle the anxiety or insomnia, so they take a pill here and there, figuring it won't matter. But it does matter. Those pills can interact with Ibogaine in ways that are unpredictable and potentially fatal. Even after passing all the screenings, there's one final checkpoint: the test dose. This small amount of Ibogaine, given hours before the flood dose, serves as a final safeguard. If your heart reacts badly, the treatment stops before it truly begins. If everything looks good, you proceed. But standing at that threshold, having jumped through every hoop and passed every test, you realise the screening process wasn't just about your body. It was about building your commitment, making you confront the risks, and ensuring that if you go forward, you do so with open eyes and no illusions. Ibogaine treatment isn't cheap. A legit clinic charges anywhere from $4,000 to $15,000 for a single treatment, and insurance sure as hell doesn't cover it. For someone deep in addiction, that's an impossible amount. People sell cars, max out credit cards, start GoFundMe campaigns, or borrow from family members who've long since given up on them. Some clinics offer payment plans, others offer scholarships if you're broke enough and desperate enough. But the cruel irony is that the people who need Ibogaine most, the ones living on the streets, stealing to survive, can't afford it, so they stay trapped, while wealthier addicts get their shot at salvation. Let's talk about what that money actually buys. At a reputable clinic, the price covers several days of treatment, usually 3 to 5 days total. Day 1 is final medical screening and preparation. Day 2 is the Ibogaine treatment itself, with round-the-clock monitoring. Days 3 through 5 are recovery, integration, and making sure you're stable enough to travel home. The cost includes medical staff, medications, room and board, and sometimes follow-up counselling. When you break it down like that, $4,000 to $15,000 doesn't seem unreasonable compared to a 28-day rehab program that costs $30,000 to $60,000 and has a much lower success rate. But here's the thing: addicts don't have $4,000 to $15,000 lying around. Addiction is expensive. They've already spent everything on drugs. Their bank accounts are empty. Their credit is destroyed. Their belongings have been sold or stolen. Coming up with thousands of dollars feels as impossible as flying to the moon. So they get creative, and by creative, I mean desperate. Some people launch crowdfunding campaigns, pouring their hearts out to strangers on the internet. They post before and after photos, tell their stories and beg for help. Some campaigns succeed, funded by compassionate strangers who believe in second chances. Others languish at $0, a public monument to how little people care or how many other causes are competing for attention. Family becomes a last resort. Addicts call parents who've bailed them out a dozen times already. They call siblings who've written them off. They make promises they've broken before. This time will be different. This is the real treatment. I just need one more chance. Some families can't afford to help even if they wanted to. Others could afford it but refuse on principle. They've thrown enough money into the addiction black hole. Why would Ibogaine be any different? Then there are the loans. People take out personal loans with predatory interest rates. They borrow from friends and promise to pay them back once they're clean and working again. They sell everything they own: cars, jewellery, electronics, furniture. One person's story on an Ibogaine forum described selling his deceased mother's wedding ring to afford treatment. He felt sick doing it, but he also knew his mother would have wanted him to choose life over sentimentality. Some clinics have created sliding scale payment structures or scholarship programs, recognizing that turning away someone who can't pay means sentencing them to death by addiction. These programs are funded by donations or by charging wealthier clients more to subsidize poorer ones. It's a beautiful idea, but the reality is that even subsidized treatment costs thousands of dollars, still out of reach for people living paycheck to paycheck or no paycheck at all. The cost creates a perverse class system in addiction treatment. If you're a wealthy executive or trust fund kid, you can fly to New Zealand, stay in a luxury facility, and receive world-class care. If you're a working-class addict, you might scrape together enough for a budget clinic in Mexico and hope for the best. And if you're poor, truly poor, you don't even get to roll the dice. You stay on the street, keep using, and wait to die. The drug that could save you might as well not exist. There's also the hidden costs that people don't consider until they're in it. Flights to Mexico or Costa Rica, time off work if you even have a job, medications for aftercare, therapy and support once you're home. The total cost of getting clean with Ibogaine can easily exceed $20,000 when you factor everything in. For most addicts, that's a fantasy number, a sum so large it might as well be $1 million. And yet, people find a way. They mortgage houses, they deplete retirement accounts, they strike deals with loan sharks they'll regret later. Because when the alternative is dying from addiction, no price feels too high. Money can be earned back, debt can be repaid, but you can't get your life back once it's gone. So people pay whatever it takes, sell whatever they have, and beg whoever will listen. And if they get clean, if Ibogaine works, then every penny was worth it. But if it doesn't work, if they relapse or die trying, then that money becomes a bitter epitaph, a fortune spent on hope that never arrived. You can't just show up high and expect Ibogaine to work miracles. Most clinics require you to be clean for at least 3 to 5 days before treatment, which means enduring withdrawal, the very thing you're trying to escape, before you even start. For opioid addicts, that means days of sweating, shaking, vomiting, and feeling like your bones are trying to escape your body. Some clinics help manage this with comfort meds. Others believe suffering is part of the process. Either way, you're white-knuckling your way to the treatment that's supposed to end all this, and the whole time you're thinking, what if this doesn't even work? The pre-Ibogaine detox is its own special circle of hell. You've made the decision to get clean, you've paid your money, you've booked your flight, and now you have to suffer through withdrawal just to qualify for the treatment that's supposed to eliminate withdrawal. The irony isn't lost on anyone, especially not you. Lying in a motel room at 3 a.m, drenched in sweat, wondering if you're going to vomit or pass out first. For opioid users, those first 72 hours off the drug are brutal. Your body has become so dependent on external opioids that it's forgotten how to regulate itself. Without heroin or fentanyl or oxycodone flooding your system, everything goes haywire. Your nervous system goes into overdrive. You experience restless leg syndrome so severe it feels like your muscles are full of electricity. You can't sleep, can't eat, can't get comfortable in any position. Hot flashes alternate with bone-deep chills. Your nose runs constantly. You vomit even though your stomach is empty. And the psychological part, the depression, the anxiety, the absolute certainty that you're going to die, might be worse than the physical symptoms. Some clinics provide what's called a comfort protocol to ease you through this phase. They might prescribe clonidine to lower blood pressure and reduce sweating, maybe some anti-nausea medication, occasionally a sleep aid, though nothing too strong because you need to be relatively clean for the Ibogaine to work properly. These comfort meds don't eliminate withdrawal, they just take the edge off, turning unbearable into merely horrible. Other clinics take a harder line. They believe that the suffering is meaningful, that it's part of breaking your psychological attachment to drugs. They'll provide medical supervision to make sure you don't die, but they won't make it easier. You're expected to tough it out, to prove your commitment. It's a philosophy that sounds cruel to outsiders, but makes a certain sense to people who've been through it. Addiction is easy. Recovery is hard. If you can't handle a few days of withdrawal, how will you handle the rest of your life? Then there's the terror of relapse during the pre-treatment phase. You're sick, you're miserable, and you know exactly how to make it stop. One phone call, one dealer, one hit, and the suffering ends immediately. The temptation is overwhelming. Some people cave. They use, miss their treatment window, and have to start the whole process over. Some clinics are understanding and reschedule. Others consider it a violation of trust and refuse to treat you. For people addicted to alcohol or benzodiazepines, the pre-treatment detox is even more dangerous. Unlike opioid withdrawal, which feels like death but rarely causes it, alcohol and benzo withdrawal can actually kill you. Seizures are common. Delirium tremens, a state of confusion, hallucinations, and cardiovascular instability can be fatal without medical intervention. That's why these patients often need medically supervised detox in a hospital before they can even travel to the Ibogaine clinic. The psychological component of pre-treatment detox is often underestimated. You're not just physically sick, you're also terrified. What if Ibogaine doesn't work for you? What if you've gone through all this suffering for nothing? What if the treatment kills you? What if you survive but immediately relapse? These thoughts circle your brain like vultures, and without drugs to numb them, they're deafening. Some clinics encourage patients to arrive a few days early to detox on-site under supervision. This makes the process safer and reduces the risk of last-minute relapse. Others require you to detox at home and provide proof, usually through urine tests, that you've been clean for the required period. The honor system doesn't work well with addicts, so the testing is necessary, even though it adds another layer of stress and expense. By the time you've completed the pre-treatment detox, you're exhausted, fragile, and running on fumes. Your body is weak from days without proper food or sleep. Your mind is raw from confronting sobriety without chemical assistance. And now you're expected to undergo the most intense psychedelic experience of your life. It seems almost cruel, but it's also strategic. Ibogaine works best when your system is relatively clean, when the drug can recalibrate your brain without interference from other substances. So you endure the detox, count down the hours, and tell yourself that the suffering has an expiration date. Soon you'll either be free or you'll be dead. Either way, the waiting will be over. The morning of your Ibogaine treatment feels surreal. You've travelled thousands of miles, spent thousands of dollars, and put your life in the hands of strangers. The clinic staff checks your vitals one last time. They hook you up to an EKG monitor. They ask if you have any last questions, and you realise you don't even know what to ask because there's no frame of reference for what's about to happen. Some people back out at this point. They look at the cup of brown sludge or the handful of capsules and think, this is insane. And they're right, it is insane. But addiction is more insane, so most people close their eyes and swallow. The morning begins quietly, almost anticlimactically. You wake up in your room at the clinic, maybe a converted bedroom in a beach house, maybe a proper medical facility, and for a moment you forget where you are or why you're here. Then it hits you. Today is the day. Everything you've worked toward, everything you've sacrificed, comes down to the next 36 hours. Breakfast, if you can stomach it, is light. Most clinics recommend you eat very little because nausea and vomiting are almost guaranteed once the Ibogaine kicks in. You might manage some toast, maybe fruit, definitely water. The staff encourages hydration because you'll be sweating for hours and unable to drink much during the experience. You sit at the table with other patients, if there are any, and nobody talks much. What is there to say? Good luck not dying. Hope your demons aren't too scary. Everyone is locked in their own private terror. After breakfast, the final medical check begins. They take your blood pressure, listen to your heart, check your temperature and oxygen levels. They review your medical history one more time, asking if anything has changed, if you took any medications you weren't supposed to, if you're feeling any unusual symptoms. This is your last chance to disclose anything you might have hidden during screening. One woman reportedly admitted at this stage that she'd taken a Xanax the night before because she couldn't sleep. The treatment was postponed. She was furious, but the clinic staff knew that combination could kill her. Then comes the EKG. You lie on the bed while electrodes are stuck to your chest, and the machine draws a jagged line representing your heart's electrical activity. The provider studies it carefully, looking for any abnormalities in the QT interval or signs of arrhythmia. If everything looks good, you proceed. If not, well, you've just learned you have a heart condition that could have killed you, and the treatment ends before it begins. It's a devastating outcome, but better than dying on a table in Mexico. Assuming you pass the final medical clearance, the provider sits down with you for what's usually called the intention-setting conversation. They ask what you hope to gain from this experience. Most people say something like, "I want to get clean," or "I want my life back." But the provider pushes deeper. What does getting clean mean to you? What will you do differently afterward? What support systems do you have? This isn't just therapeutic conversation, it's preparation. The Ibogaine experience is profoundly influenced by your mindset going in. If you approach it with clarity and purpose, the visions tend to be more coherent and useful. If you go in terrified and resistant, it can turn into a psychological cage match. And then there's the moment of truth. The provider brings out the Ibogaine, either capsules in a little cup or a brownish liquid that looks and smells like something scraped off a forest floor. Some clinics say a prayer or perform a small ceremony, acknowledging the indigenous roots of the medicine and the seriousness of what's about to happen. Others keep it clinical. Here's your dose. Swallow these with water. Let us know if you need anything. This is when some people freeze. They hold the cup in their hand and can't bring it to their lips. The finality of it is overwhelming. Once you swallow, there's no undo button, no changing your mind, no escape hatch. You're committed to whatever happens next. This staff is patient usually. They've seen this hesitation before. They'll give you time, but not too much time, because wavering too long is a sign you're not ready. Some people cry when they take the dose, some laugh nervously, some just stare straight ahead like soldiers going over the top of a trench. And then it's done. The medicine is in your body, working its way through your stomach into your bloodstream, heading for your brain. You lie back on the bed, they cover you with a blanket, and the waiting begins. The staff dims the lights, puts on quiet music, and settles in to monitor you. From here on out, you're a passenger. The Ibogaine is driving, and all you can do is hold on and hope you make it to the other side. The first hour after taking Ibogaine is relatively mild, which is almost worse because you're just sitting there waiting for the hammer to drop. You might feel a slight tingling, some nausea, maybe a sense of unease. Your vision starts to blur at the edges. Sounds become sharper or stranger. You're still you, but you can feel the drug creeping through your bloodstream, knocking on doors in your brain that have been locked for years. And then, usually around the 90-minute mark, the doors explode open, and you're no longer sitting in a clinic in Mexico. You're somewhere else entirely, and there's no coming back until the drug decides you're done. Those first 60 minutes are deceptively calm, like standing on a beach watching a tsunami form on the horizon. You know it's coming. You can see it building. But you can't quite believe it's real until it's too late to run. You lie in bed, eyes closed or open, trying to relax but unable to shake the feeling that you're standing at the edge of a cliff about to jump. The physical sensation starts subtly. Maybe a tingling in your fingers and toes, like mild pins and needles. Your skin might feel hypersensitive, The sheets against your body feel weird, too rough or too soft. Temperature regulation goes haywire early. One moment you're pulling the blanket up because you're freezing, the next you're kicking it off because you're burning up. Your heart rate is being monitored, and you're acutely aware of every beat, wondering if the next one will be the irregular one that ends everything. Nausea usually arrives within the first 30 to 45 minutes. It starts as a vague queasiness, the kind you might get on a turbulent flight. Then it intensifies. Your stomach churns. Saliva floods your mouth. The staff hands you a bucket just in case, and you grip it like a life preserver. Some people vomit during this phase. Others manage to hold it down, though they'll almost certainly throw up later. The nausea isn't like food poisoning or a stomach bug. It's deeper, more existential, like your body's trying to purge something that can't be purged through vomiting alone. Visual distortions begin around the 45-minute mark. With your eyes open, the room looks mostly normal but slightly off. The walls might breathe gently. Colours seem more saturated. Shadows flicker with an intelligence they shouldn't have. It's not frightening yet, just strange, like reality is showing you its rough draft before committing to the final version. When you close your eyes, you might see geometric patterns, fractals, or swirling colours, the standard psychedelic starter pack. Nothing too intense yet, but unmistakably present. Your sense of time starts slipping. 5 minutes feels like an hour, or maybe an hour feels like 5 minutes. You're not sure anymore. The clock on the wall becomes meaningless. You're entering what one person called Ibogaine time, a dimension where linear progression doesn't exist and all moments feel simultaneous. This temporal distortion will only get worse, and by hour 3, you'll have no idea if you've been lying here for days or minutes. Auditory changes arrive subtly. The music playing in the background, usually something ambient and soothing, starts to sound strange. You hear layers you didn't notice before. Or maybe the layers were always there and your brain is just processing sound differently now. Someone walking past your door sounds like they're inside your head. Your own breathing becomes loud, mechanical, like you're hearing it through a microphone. Some people report a ringing in their ears, not unpleasant but persistent, like the universe is humming a single note. Around the 90-minute mark, something shifts dramatically. It's hard to describe if you haven't experienced it, but people often use the same phrase. This is when it really started. The mild effects you've been experiencing suddenly intensify exponentially. The geometric patterns behind your eyelids explode into full scenes. The nausea becomes overwhelming. Your body feels disconnected from your mind, like you're a consciousness floating above a meat suit that used to be yours. This is the point of no return, and the anxiety, oh the anxiety! Even people who are calm and confident during the first hour often panic when they realize what's happening. Your brain, confronted with an experience completely outside its reference frame, screams that something is terribly wrong. You want to sit up, take back control, maybe call the whole thing off. But you can't. Your body won't respond the way you want it to. The staff tells you to relax, to let go, to stop fighting. Easy for them to say. They're not the ones dissolving into a puddle of consciousness while their life flashes before their eyes. This is the threshold. You're about to cross from consensus reality into something else, something vast and terrifying and potentially transformative. The drug has finished knocking politely. Now it's kicking the doors down. And for the next 24 to 36 hours, whatever it shows you, whatever it makes you feel, whatever it rips out of your subconscious and forces you to confront, you have no choice but to witness. The hammer has dropped, and you're lying directly beneath it. People describe Ibogaine visions as more real than reality. You're not hallucinating in the traditional sense, no pink elephants or dancing goblins. Instead, you're watching your life unfold in vivid, often painful detail. You see the moment you first tried drugs. You see the people you hurt, You see your childhood trauma, your dead relatives, your deepest fears, all playing out in cinematic clarity. Some people report meeting entities or travelling through alternate dimensions. Others describe it as pure introspection, like your subconscious finally got the microphone and won't shut up. The visions aren't random, they're targeted, almost surgical, showing you exactly what you need to see to understand why you became an addict in the first place. The visions typically begin with your personal history playing out like a movie, except you're not watching from the audience, you're both the actor and the camera, experiencing events from multiple perspectives simultaneously. You see yourself as a 7-year-old child sitting at the dinner table while your parents fight, but you're not just remembering it, you're there, feeling the fear and confusion, and simultaneously you're seeing yourself from your mother's perspective, understanding her frustration and exhaustion, and from your father's, seeing his anger masking deep insecurity. It's like emotional data downloaded directly into your consciousness, bypassing the intellectual understanding you might have achieved through years of therapy. The chronology is usually, but not always, linear. You watch your life from early childhood forward, though some people report jumping around in time or revisiting certain moments repeatedly. The scenes that appear aren't random nostalgia. They're the moments that shaped you, especially the painful ones you've spent years trying to forget. The time a teacher humiliated you in front of the class. The day you realized your parents didn't love each other. The moment a trusted adult betrayed you. The first time you felt truly alone. These memories surface with such intensity that you're not just remembering, you're reliving, reprocessing, and somehow, inexplicably, releasing. Many people report seeing the exact moment their addiction began, though they might not have recognized it as such at the time. Maybe it was when you took your first drink to calm your nerves before a party and felt the anxiety dissolve like magic. Maybe it was when someone handed you a pill and for the first time in months your chronic pain disappeared. The vision shows you not just what happened, but why it mattered. You see the vulnerability, the need, the emptiness that made drugs feel like salvation instead of destruction. The visions also force you to confront the people you've hurt. You see your mother crying when she found your stash, your partner packing their bags and leaving, your child's face when you missed another birthday. But here's where it gets strange. You don't just see these moments from your own guilty perspective. You experience them from their perspective. You feel your mother's heartbreak, your partner's exhausted resignation, your child's confusion and abandonment. It's empathy delivered like a sledgehammer, and there's nowhere to hide from it. Some people encounter what they describe as entities, beings of light, ancestors, spirit guides, or simply presences that feel intelligent and intentional. These encounters are among the most controversial aspects of Ibogaine because they feel undeniably real to the person experiencing them. A woman reported having a conversation with her grandmother who died 20 years earlier. Her grandmother told her she was loved, forgiven, and capable of healing. Skeptics dismiss this as drug-induced hallucination, neurons misfiring randomly. But to the woman, it was as real as any conversation she had ever had, and it gave her the strength to stay clean for years afterward. Others travel through what they describe as alternate dimensions or cosmic landscapes, geometric structures that extend infinitely in all directions, rivers of light and sound, libraries containing all knowledge, rooms where time doesn't exist. These experiences defy language because they're fundamentally indescribable. People come back saying things like, "I saw the structure of consciousness itself," or "I understood the interconnectedness of all things," which sounds like New Age nonsense until you're the one trying to explain something your brain has no vocabulary for. Not all visions are enlightening or beautiful. Some are terrifying. You might see yourself dying from an overdose, watching your own funeral, seeing the grief you leave behind, You might confront manifestations of your shame, rage, or self-hatred, shadow aspects of yourself you've spent a lifetime denying. These dark visions serve a purpose, though. They show you the stakes. They make clear what addiction is stealing from you and what sobriety offers in return. The visions typically last anywhere from 8 to 16 hours, though time loses meaning so completely that you have no real sense of how long you've been in this state. When they finally start to fade, you're left exhausted, emotionally raw, and fundamentally changed. You've seen your entire life from angles you never knew existed. You've felt empathy for people you thought you hated. You've forgiven yourself for things you thought were unforgivable. Or at least, you've started the process. Because what you've just witnessed isn't just a trip, it's the beginning of understanding who you are and why you became someone who needed drugs to function. And that understanding, painful as it is, becomes the foundation for everything that comes next. While your mind is off on a vision quest, your body is going through hell. Your heart rate drops, your blood pressure fluctuates, you're trembling, sweating, and freezing all at once. Many people vomit repeatedly, which is why clinics keep a bucket nearby and don't judge when you miss. You can't walk. You can barely lift your head. Your muscles feel like wet noodles. Some people lose control of their bladder. It's not dignified. It's not pretty. But it's part of the process, and the clinic staff has seen it all before. They sit with you, monitor your vitals, and occasionally wipe your face with a cool cloth while you're too deep in the trip to even notice. The physical experience of Ibogaine is in many ways worse than the psychological one. At least the visions have meaning, a narrative arc, moments of insight. The physical ordeal is just suffering. Pure, unrelenting, pointless suffering that serves no purpose except to remind you that your body still exists and currently hates everything about the situation. Your heart becomes a focal point of anxiety. Because you know Ibogaine affects cardiac function, every irregular beat sends a spike of fear through you. Is this normal? Should I tell someone? Am I dying? The EKG machine attached to your chest beeps steadily, and you become obsessed with that sound. As long as it's beeping, you're alive. If it stops beeping, well, that's a whole different problem. Your heart rate typically drops significantly during the experience, sometimes into the low 40s or high 30s. For a healthy person, this is concerning but manageable. For someone with underlying cardiac issues, this is where things can go fatally wrong. Blood pressure swings wildly. One moment it's elevated, adrenaline coursing through your system as you confront traumatic memories. The next moment it plummets, and you feel like you're sinking into the mattress, barely tethered to consciousness. The clinic staff checks it regularly, sometimes every 50 minutes during the peak. If it drops too low, they might elevate your legs or administer fluids. If it spikes too high, they watch carefully, ready to intervene if necessary. Temperature regulation becomes impossible. You cycle through hot flashes and chills so rapidly that the blanket becomes both enemy and friend. You're drenched in sweat, your hair plastered to your forehead, your sheets soaked through. The staff changes your pillowcase periodically because lying on wet fabric for hours is miserable. But then you'll suddenly be freezing, teeth chattering, convinced you'll never be warm again. You pile on blankets only to throw them off minutes later when the next hot flash hits. The nausea is relentless. It's not just garden variety queasiness. It's a full body sensation that makes you regret every meal you've ever eaten. The bucket becomes your closest companion. Most people vomit multiple times during the experience, 5, 10, sometimes 20 times over the course of 36 hours. Eventually you're just dry heaving, your stomach empty, but still trying to expel something. Anything. The clinic staff holds your hair if you have any, rubs your back, murmurs reassurances you probably can't hear. It's humiliating. But in a strange way, the humiliation becomes meaningless. Pride is a luxury for people who can control their bodies. Right now, you're not one of those people. Your muscles lose all coordination. Even basic tasks become impossible. Reaching for a cup of water requires concentration and often fails. Walking to the bathroom is out of the question. You either need help or you use a bedpan, adding yet another indignity to the pile. Your legs feel like they're made of rubber. Your arms won't respond to commands. You're essentially paralyzed, though unlike actual paralysis, you can feel everything. Every muscle ache, every joint complaint, every nerve firing randomly just to remind you it exists. Some people lose bladder control, especially during the peak of the experience. Your brain is so overwhelmed by visions and emotional processing that basic bodily functions become an afterthought. The staff handles this with practiced professionalism, changing sheets without comment, cleaning you up like you're a child. It's mortifying in the moment, or it would be if you were capable of caring. Mostly, you're just relieved you don't have to get up because getting up is literally impossible. Then there's the trembling. Your entire body shakes, sometimes violently as if you're cold or terrified or both. The tremors come in waves, sometimes lasting minutes, sometimes hours. They're exhausting. Every muscle is engaged in this involuntary dance, burning energy you don't have, leaving you even more depleted. The staff might place a weighted blanket on you, which helps some people. Others just endure it, waiting for each wave to pass. And through all of this, the sweating, the vomiting, the shaking, the cardiac anxiety, you're still having visions. Your body is in crisis mode while your mind processes decades of trauma. It's sensory overload multiplied by emotional overload, and the only way out is through. No shortcuts, no escape hatches, no pause buttons. Just you, your body, your mind, and 36 hours that feel like eternity. When it finally ends, when the worst of the physical symptoms start to subside, you're left feeling like you've been hit by a truck, dragged through a swamp, and wrung out like a dirty rag. But you're alive, and that somehow feels like a miracle. One of the most terrifying aspects of Ibogaine is that it forces you to confront everything you've been running from. Addiction is, at its core, an escape mechanism. You use drugs to numb pain, avoid responsibility, or quiet the voice in your head that says you're not good enough. Ibogaine rips that escape hatch away and makes you look at the pain directly. You can't distract yourself. You can't run. You're trapped in your own mind, and every unresolved trauma, every lie you've told yourself, every person you've hurt is right there, demanding to be acknowledged. Some people break down sobbing. Others experience profound forgiveness. A few have full-blown panic attacks. But by the end, most people report feeling lighter, like they've been carrying a weight they didn't even know was there. The psychological reckoning doesn't announce itself politely. It arrives like a freight train at 3 a.m, barreling through your defences and demanding an accounting. One moment you're watching relatively benign memories play out, family dinners, childhood birthday parties, that time you fell off your bike, and then suddenly you're face to face with the thing you've spent your entire adult life trying to forget. Maybe it's sexual abuse. Maybe it's the day your parent told you they wished you'd never been born. Maybe it's the friend who died while you were driving drunk. Maybe it's the realization that you've wasted 20 years of your life chasing a feeling that never lasted more than a few hours. Whatever it is, Ibogaine drags it out of the basement and makes you look at it under the harshest light imaginable. What makes this different from regular therapy or even other psychedelics is the completeness of it. You can't intellectualize your way around it. You can't say, well, I've processed that trauma, I'm over it. Ibogaine shows you in excruciating emotional detail that you're not over it. You're still carrying it. It's still controlling your behavior. And until you truly feel it, acknowledge it, and release it, you'll keep using drugs to avoid it. The shame is often the hardest part. Addiction creates a mountain of shame. Shame about what you've done, who you've hurt, what you've become. Most addicts carry this shame constantly, a background hum of self-loathing that never quite goes away. But they keep it at arm's length through denial, justification, or intoxication. Ibogaine removes all those buffers and makes you feel the full weight of your shame all at once. You see yourself stealing from your mother's purse. You see your child's face when you forgot to pick them up from school because you were too high to remember. You see your partner's tears after you lied to them for the 100th time. You see the friend who overdosed and died, and you remember how you felt relieved it wasn't you, and you feel all the shame, guilt, and self-hatred that you've been numbing for years. It's crushing, unbearable. Many people sob uncontrollably during this phase, their bodies racked with grief for the life they've destroyed. But here's where something remarkable often happens: forgiveness. Not from others. You can't control whether they forgive you, but from yourself. Somewhere in the depths of the experience, usually after you've fully confronted the worst parts of yourself, a shift occurs. You begin to understand why you made the choices you made. You see the hurt child inside the addicted adult. You recognize that you were doing the best you could with the tools you had, even if your best was terrible. And slowly, tentatively, you begin to forgive yourself. This doesn't mean excusing your behavior. It means accepting it as part of your story without letting it define you forever. One man described it as meeting myself without judgment for the first time in my life. He saw all his failures, all his cruelty, all his weakness, and instead of hating himself, he felt compassion. It was, he said, more powerful than any drug he'd ever taken. Some people encounter what they describe as a higher self or inner wisdom, a part of themselves that exists beyond ego, trauma, and addiction. This voice speaks with clarity and authority, offering guidance that feels both foreign and deeply familiar. It tells them what they need to do to stay clean, what relationships they need to repair or end, what old behaviors won't work anymore. People often describe this voice as the truest thing they've ever heard, even if they can't explain where it came from. Not everyone has a smooth psychological reckoning. Some people resist so hard that the experience becomes a war. They fight the visions, deny the insights, refuse to let go of old narratives. These are the people who often have the most difficult trips, and sometimes emerge unchanged or even more damaged. Ibogaine can show you the door to healing, but it can't force you through it. Others are simply overwhelmed. The psychological material that surfaces is too much, too fast, too intense. They dissociate, fragmenting under the pressure. This is why reputable clinics screen for severe mental illness. The risk of a permanent psychotic break is real. For most people, though, the psychological reckoning, as brutal as it is, becomes the most valuable part of the experience. Because you can't heal what you won't acknowledge, and Ibogaine makes sure you acknowledge everything. By the time the reckoning ends, typically 10 to 16 hours into the experience, you're emotionally exhausted but oddly clear. The demons you faced haven't disappeared, but they're no longer controlling you. You've looked them in the eye, called them by name, and survived. And that survival, that act of confronting the worst parts of yourself and not dying, becomes the foundation of your recovery. You've proven to yourself that you can face pain without drugs. Now you just have to keep proving it, one day at a time, for the rest of your life. After 36 hours, the visions fade, and you're left lying in a bed, exhausted, disoriented, and profoundly changed. Your body feels like it's been through a war, because it has. You're weak, shaky, and probably dehydrated. But here's the miracle. The cravings are gone. The obsessive thoughts about using are gone. For the first time in years, maybe decades, Your brain feels quiet. Clinic staff call this the afterglow phase, and it can last anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. You feel clear-headed, motivated, even euphoric. Some people describe it as being reborn. But here's the catch. Ibogaine doesn't fix your life. It fixes your brain chemistry. You still have to rebuild everything else. The first sensation when you finally emerge from the acute phase is profound relief. You're still alive. Your heart is still beating. The visions have stopped. You can move your arms and legs again, though they feel like they belong to someone else. A clinic staff member asks how you're feeling, and you try to answer but words feel inadequate. How do you explain that you just spent 36 hours watching your entire life disassemble and reassemble? You settle for "I'm okay," which is both true and laughably insufficient. Your body's wrecked. You're dehydrated despite the IV fluids some clinics provide. Your muscles ache like you ran a marathon. Your stomach is empty and sore from hours of vomiting. Your eyes are dry and sensitive to light. You probably smell terrible, sweat, vomit, and something else you can't quite identify, maybe fear evaporating from your pores. The staff helps you to the bathroom, and catching a glimpse of yourself in the mirror is startling. You look haunted, hollowed out, decades older than you did 2 days ago. But then you notice something strange. The voice in your head, the constant, nagging, desperate voice that spent every waking moment thinking about drugs, is gone. Just gone. It's so quiet in there that at first you think something is wrong. You wait for the craving to kick in, for your brain to start plotting out a score, but nothing happens. You lie there in stunned silence, waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it doesn't. For the first time in years, you're not thinking about drugs, not even a little bit. It feels like a miracle, and maybe it is. The mental clarity is almost unsettling. Colours seem brighter, sounds are crisper. Your thoughts flow in straight lines instead of the chaotic spirals of addiction. Some people report feeling emotions they haven't felt in years, genuine joy, curiosity, even hope. One woman said it was like someone had cleaned the windshield of her consciousness. She'd been looking through grime for so long she'd forgotten what clear vision felt like. This afterglow phase is intoxicating in its own right. You feel invincible, like you've conquered the unconquerable. You imagine your future with stunning clarity. You'll get a job, repair relationships, become the person you always knew you could be. Everything seems possible. This is where many people make the mistake of thinking the work is done. They've taken the medicine, done the hard part, and now they can just coast into sobriety. But the afterglow is temporary. It's a gift, a window of opportunity, not a permanent state. The clinic usually keeps you for a few more days after the acute experience ends. They monitor your vitals, make sure you can eat and walk without assistance, and begin the integration process. Integration is the fancy therapeutic term for making sense of what the hell just happened. You sit with a counsellor or therapist and try to articulate the insights you gained. What did you learn about yourself? What patterns do you need to change? What relationships need healing or ending? What's your plan for staying clean once you return to your regular life? This is harder than it sounds because the visions, which felt crystal clear during the trip, become fuzzy and fragmented in retrospect. You remember the emotional impact, the grief, the forgiveness, the revelation, but the specifics blur like a dream upon waking. You're left with impressions, feelings, and a general sense that something profound occurred, but you can't always explain it coherently. The integration sessions help you capture and concretize those insights before they evaporate entirely. Some clinics provide written materials, journals for recording your thoughts, worksheets for planning your post-treatment life, phone numbers for support groups and therapists. Others offer follow-up counselling via phone or video chat once you're home. The good clinics understand that Ibogaine is not a standalone cure. It's the opening move in a much longer game of recovery, and you need support to win that game. The physical afterglow lasts about a week. During this time, you still feel tired and fragile, but each day is noticeably better than the last. Your appetite returns, your energy slowly rebuilds, the shakiness subsides. But the psychological afterglow, the mental clarity, the absence of cravings, the sense of possibility, can last anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months. For some lucky people, it never fully fades. They go home, rebuild their lives, and never use again. For others, the afterglow dims, and they're left facing the same broken life that drove them to addiction in the first place. That's when the real test begins. Because here's the truth they don't always tell you. Ibogaine removes the physical dependency and gives you a psychological reset. But it doesn't change your circumstances. You still have the same crappy job, the same toxic relationships, the same financial problems. The difference is that now you have to face them sober, and without the mental clarity of the afterglow propping you up, sobriety starts to feel hard again. This is where many people relapse, not because Ibogaine failed, but because they failed to do the work required to maintain what Ibogaine gave them. The drug opened the door, but walking through it and staying on the other side, that's entirely on you. There are countless stories of people whose lives were transformed by Ibogaine. Former heroin addicts who've been clean for years, alcoholics who can finally have dinner without ordering wine, meth users who rebuilt relationships with their families. These aren't anecdotes from fringe blogs. These are documented cases where traditional treatment failed repeatedly and Ibogaine succeeded on the first try. Some people go back to their old lives and never use again. Others describe feeling fundamentally different, like the person who was addicted died during the trip and someone new woke up. Critics dismiss these stories as placebo effect or temporary euphoria, but when you talk to someone who's been through it, the change is undeniable. Take Marcus, a 38-year-old construction worker from Ohio who'd been addicted to heroin for 15 years. He'd tried rehab 4 times, spent 6 months on methadone, did the 12-step thing, and relapsed every single time. His family had given up on him. His wife left. He lost custody of his kids. He was living in a motel, stealing to support his habit, and seriously contemplating suicide because he couldn't see a way out. Then a friend told him about Ibogaine. Marcus was skeptical. It sounded too good to be true, and everything that sounded too good to be true usually was. But he was also desperate enough that he scraped together $5,000 and flew to Mexico. The experience was exactly as hellish as everyone warned him it would be. He vomited for hours. He relived every terrible thing he'd ever done. He saw his children crying, asking where Daddy was. He saw himself dying in the motel room alone and forgotten. But when he woke up on the other side, the cravings were gone. Completely gone. He went home, got a job, started attending NA meetings, not because he needed them to stay clean, but because he wanted the community. 5 years later, he's still clean. He remarried, not to his ex-wife, but to someone he met in recovery. He sees his kids every weekend. When he talks about Ibogaine, he gets emotional. That drug saved my life, he says simply. I was dead. Now I'm not. Or consider Sarah, a 29-year-old from Toronto who'd been an alcoholic since her late teens. She'd wake up drinking, spend her entire day drunk, pass out and repeat. She'd been hospitalized twice for alcohol poisoning. Her liver enzymes were through the roof. Doctors told her bluntly that if she didn't stop drinking, she'd be dead within 2 years. But she couldn't stop. Every attempt at sobriety lasted days, maybe a week, before the cravings overwhelmed her. Traditional treatment didn't work because the moment she left the facility, she'd walk straight to a liquor store. Ibogaine was a last-ditch effort suggested by a therapist who'd heard about it but never seen it used. Sarah flew to Costa Rica terrified but out of options. Her trip was dominated by visions of her father, an abusive alcoholic who died when she was 12. She relived moments of his violence, his cruelty, but also moments of tenderness that she had forgotten. She saw how his addiction had destroyed him and was now destroying her. And somehow, during the experience, she found forgiveness, not for him, but for herself. She'd spent years hating herself for becoming like him, and Ibogaine showed her that she wasn't doomed to his fate. When she woke up, the compulsion to drink was gone. Not dulled, not manageable, gone. She's been sober for 3 years now, works as an addiction counsellor, and speaks openly about Ibogaine, even though it gets her criticised by colleagues who think she's promoting dangerous pseudoscience. Then there's James, a 52-year-old veteran from California with a 30-year crack cocaine addiction. He'd been in and out of the VA system his entire adult life. PTSD from his time in the Gulf War drove him to drugs, and the drugs made the PTSD worse, in a vicious cycle that consumed his life. The VA tried every intervention: therapy, medication, residential treatment. Nothing worked. James heard about Ibogaine from another veteran in an online forum. He was skeptical, cynical even, but also utterly hopeless. He figured dying in a Mexican clinic wasn't worse than dying on the streets of Los Angeles, so he went. His experience was intensely focused on his military trauma. He relived combat experiences, watched friends die, felt the guilt he'd carried for decades. But he also felt for the first time that these experiences didn't define him. He could carry them without being destroyed by them. When he came out of the trip, his crack cravings were gone, but even more significantly, his PTSD symptoms were dramatically reduced. He still has bad days, still sees a therapist, but the intrusive thoughts and nightmares that plagued him for 30 years occur rarely now. He's been clean for 4 years and volunteers at a homeless shelter, helping other veterans find resources. These stories are not anomalies. They're repeated across continents, across demographics, across every type of addiction. Not everyone succeeds. Relapse is still possible, even after Ibogaine, but the success rate is notably higher than traditional treatment methods. Studies, the few that have been done, show somewhere between 60 to 80% of people report significant reduction in cravings after one Ibogaine treatment, with many maintaining sobriety long term. Critics argue that these are self-selected success stories, that the people who fail don't get interviewed or written about. That's partially true, but when you compare it to traditional rehab, which has a 5 to 10% long-term success rate, even a 50% success rate with Ibogaine looks miraculous. And when you talk to someone whose life was saved, someone who went from homeless and hopeless to employed and present, arguing about methodology and sample sizes feels almost obscene. They were dying. Now they're not. Maybe that's all the data we really need. Not everyone walks away cured. Some people take Ibogaine and relapse within weeks. Others have the trip, see the visions, feel the afterglow, and then slide right back into addiction, because their life circumstances haven't changed. A few people have such traumatic experiences during the trip that they end up worse off, haunted by what they saw. And then there are the deaths, rare, but real. People who didn't disclose heart conditions, people who used drugs right before treatment, people who simply got unlucky. Ibogaine is not a guarantee. It's a tool, and like any tool, it can be misused or fail entirely. The question is, when nothing else has worked, is it worth the risk? Meet Daniel, a 41-year-old opioid addict who saved for 2 years to afford Ibogaine treatment. He went to a clinic in Mexico, had an intense experience, saw all the requisite visions about his childhood trauma and failed relationships, and emerged feeling cleansed and hopeful. For 3 weeks, he was clean. Then he ran into an old friend, someone he used to get high with, and within hours he'd relapsed. 6 months later, he was using more heavily than before he went to Mexico. When asked what happened, Daniel shrugged and said, "The drug worked. I just didn't." He felt like a failure, like he'd wasted his money and proven he was beyond help. His story illustrates an uncomfortable truth. Ibogaine can remove cravings and provide psychological insights, but it can't change your environment, your friends, or your inability to cope with stress without substances. Or consider Angela, a 45-year-old alcoholic who travelled to Costa Rica for treatment. Her Ibogaine experience was nightmarish. She encountered horrifying images of herself dying violently, saw demonic entities that she believed were real, and emerged from the trip psychologically shattered. She developed PTSD from the Ibogaine experience itself. Loud noises trigger flashbacks to the trip. She can't sleep without medication because she's terrified of dreaming. And she started drinking again within a month because alcohol was the only thing that calmed her terror. Her therapist believes Ibogaine unearthed trauma she wasn't psychologically prepared to process, and without adequate integration support, she couldn't make sense of what she'd experienced. She now warns people online against Ibogaine, calling it psychological torture disguised as treatment. Then there's the issue of people who are simply not good candidates but take Ibogaine anyway. Like Robert, who lied during screening about his heart condition because he was desperate and afraid of being turned away. He took Ibogaine at a budget clinic that didn't do thorough medical checks. 4 hours into the experience, his heart went into arrhythmia. The clinic didn't have proper emergency equipment. By the time an ambulance arrived, Robert had been without oxygen for several minutes. He survived, but suffered brain damage that left him with cognitive impairments. His family sued the clinic, but because it operated in a legal grey area, there was little recourse. Robert's story is a cautionary tale about what happens when desperate people meet unregulated treatment. Some failures are more subtle. People who take Ibogaine but don't change their lives afterward. They go back to the same neighbourhood, the same job they hate, the same toxic relationships. The cravings stay away for a while, but without addressing the underlying reasons they use drugs in the first place, they eventually relapse. Ibogaine gave them a blank slate, but they drew the same picture on it. There are also cases where the psychological insights from Ibogaine are too overwhelming. One man realised during his trip that he'd been sexually abused as a child, a memory he'd completely repressed. The revelation sent him into a severe depression. He wasn't equipped to deal with this information, didn't have a therapist lined up, and spiralled into suicidal ideation. Fortunately, he sought help and is now in intensive therapy, but he considers his Ibogaine experience to have been more harmful than helpful. The drug opened a door he wasn't ready to walk through, and then there are the deaths. Exact numbers are hard to pin down because many occur in unregulated settings and go unreported, but estimates suggest somewhere between 1 in 300 to 1 in 500 Ibogaine treatments result in fatalities. That might sound like good odds until you're the one dying, or the family member getting a phone call from a Mexican clinic saying your loved one didn't make it. Most deaths are cardiac related, arrhythmias triggered by the drug's effect on the QT interval. Some are caused by drug interactions that weren't properly screened for. A few are simply unexplained. People who seemed healthy, but whose hearts stopped during the experience for reasons nobody understands. The failure stories don't get promoted on clinic websites or in advocacy literature. Nobody wants to talk about the people who paid thousands of dollars, endured 36 hours of hell, and came out still addicted or dead or traumatized. But these stories are crucial because they reveal an uncomfortable truth. Ibogaine is not a magic bullet. It's a high-risk, high-reward intervention that works beautifully for some people and fails catastrophically for others, and we don't yet understand enough to predict which outcome any individual will experience. This doesn't mean Ibogaine should be abandoned or dismissed. It means it should be approached with eyes wide open, with proper screening, with medical oversight, with psychological support, and with the understanding that it's one tool in a much larger toolkit. For people who've tried everything else and failed, Ibogaine might be worth the risk, but risk is the operative word, and pretending otherwise does nobody any favours. For decades, mainstream science ignored Ibogaine. It was too fringe, too dangerous, too tied to hippie culture and underground clinics. But recently, that's changing. Universities are conducting clinical trials. Neurologists are studying its effects on brain plasticity. Addiction specialists are admitting quietly that it might actually work. The problem is research moves slowly, especially when you're dealing with a Schedule I drug. Funding is hard to get. Ethics boards are nervous. And even if studies prove Ibogaine is effective, getting it legalized and regulated will take years, maybe decades. Meanwhile, people are dying of overdoses every day, and the drug that could save them sits in legal limbo. The shift in scientific attitude began quietly around the early 2000s, when a handful of researchers, mostly outside the United States, decided to risk their reputations by studying Ibogaine seriously. Dr. Deborah Mash at the University of Miami was one of the pioneers, conducting some of the first systematic research into Ibogaine's effects on addiction. Her work was controversial, underfunded, and often criticised by colleagues who thought she was wasting time on a dangerous folk remedy. But her studies produced intriguing results. Ibogaine appeared to significantly reduce cravings and withdrawal symptoms in opioid addicts, with effects lasting months after a single dose. Other researchers began noticing patterns. Brain imaging studies showed that Ibogaine increased neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural connections. This was potentially huge because addiction literally rewires the brain, and most treatments focus on managing symptoms rather than reversing the underlying changes. If Ibogaine could genuinely repair addiction-damaged neural pathways, it represented a paradigm shift in how we think about treating substance use disorders. But conducting rigorous research on Ibogaine is nearly impossible in the United States. The FDA classifies it as Schedule I, which means researchers need special licenses, face mountains of bureaucratic red tape, and struggle to secure funding because grant-giving institutions are wary of association with illegal drugs. Most Ibogaine research has therefore occurred in countries with more lenient regulations: New Zealand, Mexico, Brazil, the Netherlands. These studies are smaller, less rigorous, and easier for skeptics to dismiss, creating a frustrating catch-22 where the drug can't be studied properly because it's illegal, and it remains illegal partly because it hasn't been studied properly. Recent developments offer some hope. Johns Hopkins, famous for its groundbreaking research on psilocybin, has expressed interest in studying Ibogaine. MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, has funded preliminary research. A few pharmaceutical companies are investigating synthetic analogues of Ibogaine that might be safer and easier to regulate. There's growing recognition, even among conservative medical institutions, that the opioid epidemic is so catastrophic that unconventional solutions deserve serious consideration. Neuroscience is particularly interested in Ibogaine's mechanism of action. How does one drug affect so many different neurotransmitter systems simultaneously? Why does it produce such profound psychological effects? Researchers using advanced imaging techniques and molecular analysis are beginning to map Ibogaine's journey through the brain, identifying receptor interactions and downstream effects that were previously mysterious. This work is painstakingly slow, but essential for understanding not just whether Ibogaine works, but why it works. There's also increasing interest in Ibogaine's potential for treating other conditions. Some researchers are exploring its effects on PTSD, given the high comorbidity between trauma and addiction. Others are investigating whether it might help with Parkinson's disease, based on its effects on dopamine regulation. A few studies have looked at Ibogaine's potential for treating traumatic brain injury. The more researchers dig, the more they realize Ibogaine is a pharmacologically complex substance with applications far beyond addiction. But even as interest grows, obstacles remain. Ethical concerns about giving potentially dangerous drugs to vulnerable populations, difficulty recruiting participants for studies when the drug is illegal, and participants risk legal consequences. The challenge of designing proper control groups when the Ibogaine experience is so distinctive that blinding participants is impossible. And perhaps most significantly, the lack of financial incentive for pharmaceutical companies to invest in developing a drug that's administered once instead of daily. The scientific community is caught between recognition that Ibogaine shows genuine promise and the practical, ethical, and legal barriers to studying it properly. Researchers who advocate for Ibogaine risk their careers and credibility. Those who dismiss it without investigation risk overlooking a potentially life-saving treatment. The result is a slow, grudging movement toward legitimacy, punctuated by breakthrough studies that get attention and then fade from view as funding runs out or political winds shift. Meanwhile, underground clinics continue treating people with methodologies that haven't been scientifically validated, creating a parallel universe where practical experience far exceeds academic understanding. Clinic operators have administered Ibogaine to thousands of patients and accumulated enormous amounts of observational data, but this data doesn't count in the eyes of mainstream science because it wasn't collected under controlled conditions. The gap between what underground practitioners know and what academic researchers can prove grows wider every year, and bridging that gap may be the greatest challenge facing Ibogaine's path to legitimacy. Here's the question that keeps coming up. If Ibogaine can save lives but also kill people, should it be available? Some argue that addiction itself is deadly, so giving people the choice, even a risky one, is ethical. Others say offering an unregulated, potentially fatal treatment to vulnerable people is exploitation. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Ibogaine should be studied, regulated and administered by trained medical professionals in controlled settings. But right now, that's not happening, so people are left with two options: risk it in an underground clinic, or stay addicted and hope traditional treatment works this time. Neither option is great, but at least Ibogaine offers a chance. The ethical debate breaks down along several fault lines. First, there's the autonomy argument. Shouldn't adults have the right to choose their own medical treatments, especially when facing a life-threatening condition like severe addiction? If someone fully understands the risks and decides Ibogaine is worth trying, who are we to stop them? This perspective values personal freedom above paternalistic protection. But critics counter that addicts, by definition, aren't in a position to make truly informed decisions. Their judgment is compromised by desperation, by the disease itself. Offering them a dangerous treatment when they're vulnerable feels less like respecting autonomy and more like taking advantage of desperation. It's similar to debates about right to try laws for terminal patients. How do you balance hope against the risk of harm or exploitation? Then there's the harm reduction angle. Addiction kills. Overdose deaths have reached epidemic proportions. If Ibogaine has even a 50% success rate and a 1 in 300 fatality rate, the math suggests it saves far more lives than it costs. From a utilitarian perspective, making Ibogaine available might reduce overall suffering and death, even accounting for the risks. But this calculus feels cold and impersonal when you're talking about real people dying on tables in unregulated clinics. The regulation question is thorny. Everyone agrees Ibogaine should ideally be administered in proper medical settings with trained staff and emergency equipment. But creating that infrastructure requires legalization, which requires research, which requires changing drug schedules, which requires political will that doesn't exist. So we're stuck in limbo. The perfect becomes the enemy of the good. We can't have safe legal Ibogaine treatment because we don't have enough research, and we can't do enough research because Ibogaine is illegal. Meanwhile, people keep dying from addiction, and the underground clinics keep operating because desperate people have nowhere else to turn. There's also the class issue. Right now, Ibogaine is accessible mainly to people with money, not rich people necessarily, but people who can scrape together several $1,000s. This creates a two-tiered system where wealthier addicts get access to a potentially life-saving treatment, while poorer addicts are stuck with methadone and 12-step programs. Is that ethical? Should experimental treatments be available only to those who can pay? Or should society subsidize access, despite the risks and legal complications? Some ethicists argue that the real moral failure isn't Ibogaine itself, but the system that makes it necessary. If conventional addiction treatment had higher success rates, if insurance actually covered adequate long-term care, if society invested in prevention and addressing root causes of addiction, maybe fewer people would feel driven to risk their lives in Mexican clinics. Ibogaine has become a symptom of a broken system, a desperate last resort that shouldn't need to exist but does, because we fail to create better alternatives. Religious and cultural perspectives add another layer. Some view drug use as a moral failing that shouldn't be treated with another drug, especially a psychedelic with spiritual dimensions. Others see Ibogaine's indigenous roots and ceremonial history as evidence that it's been safely used for centuries and deserves respect rather than prohibition. The Western medical model's skepticism toward plant-based medicines and spiritual healing creates friction with traditions that have used Ibogaine sacramentally for generations. There's also the question of informed consent in underground settings. Can someone truly consent to treatment when the provider might not disclose all risks, when they're in a foreign country with limited legal recourse, when they're desperate enough to take risks they'd normally reject? Some clinics are scrupulously ethical, providing detailed information and thorough screening. Others are less careful. Without regulation, patients can't reliably distinguish between the two until it's too late. Perhaps the most honest answer to the ethical dilemma is this: Ibogaine is dangerous, but so is doing nothing. Every ethical framework, autonomy, utilitarianism, harm reduction, justice, points in slightly different directions, and there's no clear consensus. What's needed is neither blanket prohibition nor unregulated access, but a middle path: careful research, thoughtful regulation, and compassionate acknowledgement that people dying from addiction deserve access to any treatment that might save them, even. The spiritual dimension also offers a narrative framework for making sense of suffering. Addiction stops being just a disease or a moral failing and becomes part of a larger spiritual journey. The years of suffering become necessary, even meaningful, because they led to this moment of awakening. This reframing doesn't excuse the damage addiction caused, but it gives people a way to integrate their past into their identity without being destroyed by shame. Skeptics rightly point out that spiritual experiences during psychedelic trips are predictable neurological phenomena, explicable through brain chemistry without invoking the supernatural. But that explanation, while scientifically accurate, misses something important. It doesn't matter whether the spiritual experiences are real in an objective sense. What matters is that they feel real and produce real psychological benefits. If believing you are forgiven by your grandmother's spirit keeps you sober, if feeling connected to universal consciousness gives your life meaning, if experiencing ego death helps you let go of destructive patterns, then the spiritual dimension of Ibogaine has therapeutic value regardless of its metaphysical truth. For many people, the spiritual aspect of Ibogaine is what makes the difference between temporary sobriety and lasting transformation. The neurological reset removes cravings, but the spiritual experience provides something to build a new life around. It answers the question, if I'm not an addict anymore, who am I? And the answer Ibogaine offers, you're a spiritual being having a human experience, connected to something larger than yourself, loved and valued beyond your understanding, is powerful enough to sustain recovery when cravings eventually return, when life gets hard, when the afterglow fades. The spiritual dimension doesn't just help people get clean, it helps them understand why staying clean matters. Getting clean is one thing, staying clean is another. Ibogaine removes the physical cravings, but it doesn't magically fix your job, your relationships, or your living situation. People who succeed long-term are the ones who do the hard work afterward. Therapy, support groups, lifestyle changes, cutting off toxic people, finding purpose. Clinics often offer integration coaching, helping patients process their visions and translate them into actionable change. But this part is on you. Ibogaine opens the door, but you have to walk through it, and that's where most people either rise or fall. The first week back home is disorienting. You've just had the most intense experience of your life, and now you're supposed to return to normal life like nothing happened. Except normal life is the problem. Your apartment still looks the same. Your phone still has the same numbers in it. The bar you used to frequent is still on the corner. The dealer's number is still saved in your contacts even though you deleted it 3 times already. Everything that triggered your addiction before is still there, waiting. This is where integration becomes critical. Integration means taking the insights you gained during the Ibogaine experience and implementing them in concrete, practical ways. Maybe you realized during your trip that your relationship with your partner is toxic and codependent. Great insight. Now you have to actually leave or radically change the dynamic, which is terrifying and complicated. Maybe you realize your job makes you miserable and you've been self-medicating to cope. Now you have to find new employment while newly sober, which sounds impossible when your resume has a 5-year gap labeled addiction. Many people underestimate how much work integration requires. They think the hard part is over, they took the Ibogaine, survived the trip, got clean, but staying clean requires reconstructing your entire life, often from scratch. You need new friends because your old friends are all users. You need new routines because your old routines revolved around getting and using drugs. You need new coping mechanisms because stress, boredom, sadness, and anxiety still exist. But you can no longer numb them chemically. Therapy becomes essential, assuming you can afford it. A good therapist helps you process the psychological material that surfaced during the Ibogaine experience. They help you identify patterns you need to change and develop healthier responses to triggers. Some people work with therapists who specialize in psychedelic integration, professionals trained to help patients make sense of intense hallucinogenic experiences. These therapists don't dismiss the spiritual or mystical dimensions. They help you extract practical wisdom from them. Support groups vary in usefulness. Some people thrive in 12-step programs, finding community and accountability. Others find AA or NA too rigid, too religious, or too focused on the disease model of addiction. Alternative groups like Smart Recovery or Refuge Recovery offer different philosophies. The key is finding some form of community because isolation is addiction's best friend. You need people who understand what you're going through, who won't judge you for your past, and who'll call you out if you start making excuses. Physical health requires attention too. Years of drug use have likely damaged your body. Your liver might be compromised. Your teeth probably need work. Your nutrition has been terrible. Getting sober means finally addressing these issues. Doctor appointments, dental work, proper meals, exercise. It sounds mundane, but taking care of your body is part of rebuilding self-respect. Each time you choose a salad over junk food, or go for a walk instead of sitting at home, you're reinforcing a new identity as someone who values their health. Employment is often the biggest practical challenge. If you've been unemployed or underemployed during your addiction, you need income to support yourself. But job hunting while newly sober is brutal. Gaps in your resume raise questions. References might be scarce or problematic. You might need to disclose your addiction history, which can lead to discrimination despite legal protections. Some people start with menial jobs just to have structure and income, planning to work their way up once they've established stability. Relationships require either repair or termination. Family members you've hurt might not trust you yet, no matter how sincerely you've changed. They've heard promises before. They've been disappointed repeatedly. Rebuilding trust takes time, consistency, and accepting that some relationships might be permanently damaged. Some people in your life will never forgive you, and you have to make peace with that. Others will cautiously give you another chance, watching carefully for signs of relapse. New relationships can be tricky. When do you disclose your addiction history? First date? Third date? Never? There's no right answer. Some people are upfront immediately, figuring if someone can't handle it, better to know early. Others wait until trust is established. Dating while newly sober is strange anyway, because you're essentially meeting people for the first time as your authentic self, not your drugged self. You might discover you don't actually like the people you used to date, or that you're attracted to completely different personalities now. The first year is the most dangerous. This is when most relapses occur, usually triggered by stress, loss, or just the accumulated exhaustion of trying so hard every single day. The Ibogaine afterglow has faded. Your brain chemistry is stabilized, which unfortunately means you're capable of getting high again. The neurological reset doesn't create permanent immunity. It just gives you a window of opportunity. If you don't build a life worth staying sober for during that window, the cravings eventually return. Some people relapse and feel like complete failures, like they wasted their Ibogaine experience. But relapse doesn't erase the benefits of Ibogaine. Many people try again, either with another Ibogaine treatment or through traditional recovery methods, armed with insights from their first experience. The knowledge that sobriety is possible, that your brain can function without drugs, remains valuable even if you temporarily slip back into old patterns. The people who succeed long-term often describe finding purpose as the key factor, whether it's reconnecting with children, pursuing a delayed education, helping other addicts, or simply proving to themselves they can build a decent life. Purpose provides motivation stronger than willpower alone. Ibogaine removes the physical chains, but purpose is what keeps you from voluntarily putting them back on. And building that purpose, discovering what makes your sober life worth living, is the real work of recovery. It's harder than the Ibogaine trip, longer than the Ibogaine trip, and ultimately more important than the Ibogaine trip, because the trip lasts 36 hours. The rest of your life lasts considerably longer. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep in your comfortable bed, in a world where addiction treatment doesn't require flying to foreign countries and risking cardiac arrest, maybe take a moment to sit with the strangeness of it all. We live in a time when a plant from Central Africa, used for centuries in spiritual ceremonies, has become a last desperate hope for people trapped in the most brutal disease of modern civilization, and that plant remains illegal, unstudied, and inaccessible to most of the people who need it, not because it doesn't work, but because it works too well, too fast, in a single dose that threatens an industry built on chronic treatment. Think about the people you've heard about tonight. Marcus, who survived 15 years of heroin addiction and now sees his kids every weekend. Sarah, who stopped drinking after one trip to Costa Rica and now helps other alcoholics find hope. James, the veteran whose 30-year crack addiction and crippling PTSD both improved after one night of facing his demons in a Mexican clinic. And think about the others, Daniel, who relapsed despite the treatment. Angela, who emerged traumatized. Robert, who suffered brain damage because a clinic cut corners. The unnamed people who died, whose families got phone calls instead of recoveries. Ibogaine isn't a fairy tale. It's not a miracle cure handed down by benevolent gods. It's a powerful, dangerous, imperfect tool that works brilliantly for some people and catastrophically for others, administered in a legal and medical grey zone because the system that should be studying and regulating it has instead chosen to criminalise and ignore it. And while that system debates and delays and protects its financial interests, people keep dying. 150 overdose deaths every single day in the United States alone. Families destroyed. Potential unrealised. Lives ended not because treatment doesn't exist, but because the treatment that might work remains locked behind walls of prohibition, fear, and profit motive. The story of Ibogaine is ultimately a story about desperation and hope, about a society that claims to care about addiction while systematically blocking access to anything that might actually cure it. It's about indigenous knowledge dismissed by Western medicine, about the courage of people willing to risk everything for a chance at freedom, and about the practitioners operating in the shadows because the light of legitimacy has been denied to them. But it's also a story about resilience, about Howard Lotsoff, a 19-year-old junkie who stumbled onto something extraordinary and spent 40 years trying to share it with a world that called him crazy, about researchers who risk their careers to study a prohibited plant, about clinic operators who help people despite the legal risks, about thousands of former addicts who took a leap of faith, survived the experience, and rebuilt their lives from the ground up. These people didn't wait for the system to save them. They saved themselves, using a tool the system said shouldn't exist. As you close your eyes tonight, maybe send a quiet thought to the person lying in a clinic somewhere right now, 20 hours into their Ibogaine experience, watching their life disassemble and reassemble, hoping desperately that when they wake up, the cravings will be gone and they'll get a second chance at being human. Maybe think about the person who wants to try Ibogaine but can't afford it, who'll wake up tomorrow still trapped, still using, still dying slowly because poverty decides who gets to access hope and who doesn't. And maybe, just maybe, feel grateful. Grateful that whatever struggles you face, you're not fighting an addiction that's trying to kill you, while society offers you either inadequate treatment or dangerous underground alternatives. Grateful that you have choices, agency, and the freedom to make decisions about your own consciousness without risking arrest or death. Grateful for the simple mercy of waking up tomorrow without cravings, without withdrawal, without having to choose between slow death and risky salvation. The story of Ibogaine reminds us that healing is complicated, that desperation makes people brave in ways that look like foolishness from the outside, and that sometimes the most important medicines are the ones that force us to confront ourselves completely. No escape, no numbing, just raw, terrifying, transformative truth. So sleep well tonight, dream peacefully, and remember that somewhere out there, someone is fighting for their life with nothing but a controversial root, a bucket, and a hope that borders on faith. History is full of people who survived impossible things through impossible means. Maybe Ibogaine's patience will be added to that list. Maybe the drug itself will eventually be recognized for what it actually is. Not a magic bullet, not a perfect cure, but a powerful tool that deserves to be studied, regulated, and made available to the people who need it most. Because in the end, every person trapped in addiction is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's friend, a human being who deserves a chance at freedom, even if that chance comes wrapped in risk and controversy. And if a 36-hour journey through hell is what it takes to reclaim a life, then maybe, just maybe, that journey's worth taking. Rest easy. Tomorrow is another day. And for some people, thanks to a strange plant from Africa and the courage to use it, tomorrow will be the first day of a life they never thought they'd get to live. Good night.